In the freezing shadow of the Montana wilderness, kindness can be a fatal mistake. When Daphne Rain pulled a massive, bleeding animal from a snowbank, she thought she was saving a stray dog. She was wrong. She didn't just save a life, she invited a war into a living room. The creature on her floor wasn't a pet. It was a king in exile, hunted by his own kind. And by the time she realized the truth, the most powerful alpha in existence had already decided. He didn't just owe her a debt. He owned her future. The windshield wipers of the battered 2018 Ford F-150 were fighting a losing battle against the blizzard. Daphne Rain gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned the color of old parchment. The heater rattled, spitting out lukewarm air that smelled faintly of burnt dust and pine. This was absolute zero in the Bitterroot Mountains, the kind of cold that didn't just chill you, it hunted you. Daphne checked her watch. 11:45 p.m. She was 3 hours late coming back from the veterinary clinic in Missoula. Double shifts were the only way to keep the lights on at her family's crumbling cabin, especially now that her father's medical bills had turned into funeral debts. She rounded the curve near Blackfoot Pass, her tires crunching on the packed ice. That was when she saw it. A mass of black fur, stark against the blinding white of the high beams. Most people would have swerved. Most people would have kept driving, knowing that stopping on a mountain pass in a blizzard was suicide. But Daphne slammed on the brakes, the truck fishtailing violently, before coming to a halt just feet from the dark shape. Silence rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. "Come on, Daph, don't be an idiot," she whispered to herself. She grabbed the heavy flashlight from the glove box and stepped out. The wind hit her like a physical blow, screaming through the pines. She waded through the knee-deep snow, the beam of her light cutting through the swirling flakes. It was a wolf, but it was impossible. Daphne had grown up in these mountains. She knew timber wolves. She knew coyotes. This thing was gargantuan. Even lying on its side, its ribcage was the size of a barrel. Its fur was midnight black, matted with ice, and something darker, thicker. Blood. So much blood. She knelt beside it, her veterinary instincts overriding her fear. The animal wasn't dead, but it was close. A ragged, wet sound rattled in its chest. She pulled off her glove and touched the animal's flank. The heat radiating off the creature was intense, fever-hot. "Hey, big guy," she murmured, her voice trembling. "What hit you?" She moved the light down. There were 3 distinct wounds on the wolf's shoulder and flank. They weren't from a car accident. They were circular, cauterized at the edges, and oozing a black, viscous fluid that smelled like sulfur. Gunshots. But the tissue around the wounds wasn't just torn. It was bubbling, as if the bullets were made of acid. Silver toxicity, her mind supplied, though she pushed the thought away. That was folklore. That was nonsense. The wolf's eye opened. It was a striking, terrifying shade of amber, glowing with a lucid intelligence that froze Daphne in place. It didn't look at her like an animal in pain. It looked at her like a man assessing a threat. A low growl vibrated through the snow, shaking the ground beneath her knees. "I'm not going to hurt you," Daphne said, keeping her voice steady, the way she did with frightened horses at the clinic. "But if you stay here, the frost is going to finish what those bullets started. I need you to help me." She ran back to the truck, lowered the tailgate, and grabbed a heavy canvas tarp she used for hauling feed. Dragging it back, she maneuvered the massive animal onto the canvas. It weighed at least 200 pounds, solid muscle and dense bone. It took 20 minutes of agonizing struggle to drag the creature up the makeshift ramp. Daphne screamed in exertion, her boots slipping on the ice, her back screaming in protest. The wolf seemed to understand. It pushed with its hind legs, groaning in agony, aiding her just enough to get into the bed of the truck. She covered him with 3 wool blankets and secured the tarp to block the wind. As she climbed back into the driver's seat, shaking uncontrollably from adrenaline and cold, she caught a glimpse of her own eyes in the rear-view mirror. They were wide, terrified. She wasn't taking him to the clinic. She couldn't. If someone had shot a wolf this size, they were poaching. If she reported it, Fish and Game would euthanize it immediately given the severity of the wounds. Just for the night, she promised herself, putting the truck in gear. I patch him up, warm him up, and release him in the morning. She had no idea that she had just loaded the king of the Northwest Territory into the back of her Ford. The cabin was drafty, but the wood stove in the living room roared with life. Daphne had laid down a plastic drop cloth on the rug before the fireplace. Getting the wolf inside had been harder than getting him into the truck. She had to use a frantic, adrenaline-fueled strength she didn't know she possessed. Now the beast lay unconscious in the firelight. Daphne moved with practiced efficiency. She boiled water, sterilized her forceps, and opened her trauma kit. The smell in the room was overpowering. Metallic blood, wet fur, and that strange ozone scent of sulfur. She cleaned the wounds. As she probed the shoulder injury, her tweezers clinked against metal. "Got you," she whispered. She pulled out a deformed bullet. It wasn't lead. It was heavy, shining under the lamplight. Pure silver. Daphne stared at the bullet in the kidney dish. Who shoots a wolf with silver? She stitched the wounds, cleaned the matted fur, and injected a high dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics and a painkiller usually reserved for draft horses. The wolf didn't flinch. His breathing had deepened, becoming less ragged. Exhaustion hit her like a tidal wave. It was 3 a.m. She stripped off her blood-stained sweater, threw on a clean, oversized hoodie, and collapsed onto the worn armchair watching the animal. "Don't eat my cat," she mumbled, eyes drooping. She fell into a restless sleep, dreaming of amber eyes and snow-stained red. A crash from the kitchen jolted her awake. Daphne gasped, sitting up. Sunlight was streaming through the frosted windows. The fire had burned down to embers. She looked at the floor. The drop cloth was empty. The blankets were kicked aside. "Hello?" she called out, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reached for the heavy cast-iron poker next to the fireplace. Another crash, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Daphne crept towards the kitchen, the poker raised. Her mind raced. Had a bear gotten in? Had the wolf woken up and panicked? She rounded the corner and froze. The wolf was gone. Standing by her kitchen counter, gripping the edge of the sink so hard his knuckles were white, was a man. He was massive, easily 6'4", and completely naked. His back was to her, revealing a landscape of corded muscle and scars that mapped a violent life. But what caught her eye were the fresh, angry stitches on his shoulder and flank. Her stitches. The black silk thread stood out against his pale, bruised skin. He was shaking, water dripping from his face as if he'd just doused himself from the tap to stay conscious. Daphne didn't scream. She couldn't, finding the air. She just made a small, strangled squeak. The man whipped around. If the wolf had been terrifying, the man was devastating. He had messy, raven black hair that fell into his eyes, the same piercing amber eyes she had seen in the snow. His face was all sharp angles and stubble, handsome in a brutal, dangerous way. He looked at the poker in her hand, then up to her face. He didn't cover himself. He didn't apologize. He looked at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "You," he rasped. His voice was deep, damaged, like gravel grinding together. "You're the one who touched me." Daphne tightened her grip on the iron poker. I saved a wolf. Where is the wolf?" The man took a stumbling step toward her. He winced, clutching his side where she had stitched him up. "I am Kieran Hale, and you have made a very complicated mistake." "Stay back!" Daphne shouted, brandishing the weapon. "I have a gun!" She didn't. She had a cat named Barnaby and a half-empty can of pepper spray in her purse in the other room. Kieran leaned heavily against the refrigerator, sliding down until he was sitting on the linoleum floor. He looked drained, his skin grey. "I need protein. Meat. Raw, if you have it." "You'll need a hospital," Daphne countered, though she didn't move to call 911. The silver bullet, the transformation, the impossible size, The stories her grandmother used to tell about the Loop-Guru, the shadow walkers. No doctors, Kieran growled. If you call an ambulance, I will be dead within the hour, and so will you. Daphne stared at him. Is that a threat? Kieran looked up, his eyes softening just a fraction. It's a warning. The men who put these bullets in me, they are tracking the blood. If they find me here, they burn this house down with us inside. As if on cue, the sound of an engine cut through the morning silence. Daphne rushed to the front window. A black SUV with tinted windows was crawling slowly down her long, snow-covered driveway. It wasn't a local car. The locals drove trucks. This was a sleek, government-issue Escalade. They're here, Daphne whispered, fear turning her blood to ice. Hide me, Kieran commanded from the kitchen floor. He tried to stand but collapsed back down. If you value your life, woman, hide me. Daphne looked at the terrifying stranger, then at the ominous car approaching her home. She had spent her whole life saving things, birds, dogs, horses. She looked at Kieran, shivering on her floor, bleeding through her handiwork. She made her choice. The root cellar, she said, rushing to him. She grabbed his arm, pulling his heavy weight upward. Under the pantry, move, now! She shoved him into the small, cool darkness of the root cellar and threw the rug over the trap door just as a heavy fist pounded on her front door. Bang, bang, bang. Daphne smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Standing on her porch were two men in grey tactical gear. They didn't look like police. They looked like mercenaries. The older one, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Morning, miss, the man said. We're looking for a dangerous animal, a rabid dog, big black stray. We tracked a blood trail to your driveway. Daphne stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her to hide the view of the bloody kitchen floor she hadn't had time to clean. I saw a wolf last night, she lied, her voice surprisingly steady. About 3 miles back, near the pass. I hit it with my truck. It ran off into the woods towards the creek. The man stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. He sniffed the air. Daphne realized with horror that the scent of Kieran's blood, and the sulfur, was probably clinging to her hoodie. Is that right? The man took a step closer. You smell like wet dog, miss. I'm a vet tech, Daphne snapped, crossing her arms. I spend my life smelling like wet dog. Do you want to check my credentials? Or are you going to go catch your rabid animal before it bites a hiker? The man held her gaze. Finally, he tapped the side of the doorframe. We'll check the creek. Lock your doors, miss. This animal, it tears throats out. They turned and walked back to the SUV. Daphne waited until they were out of sight before she collapsed against the door, sliding down to the floor. From beneath the pantry rug, a muffled voice spoke. Good girl. The silence that followed the departure of the black SUV was heavy enough to crush a lung. Daphne waited by the window for 5 full minutes, watching the snow erase the tire tracks of the mercenaries. Only when the white blanket was pristine again did she exhale, the breath leaving her in a shuddering cloud. She walked to the pantry and threw back the rug. She hauled the trap door open. They're gone, she whispered into the dark. Kieran Hale climbed out. He moved with more difficulty now, the adrenaline of the threat fading, leaving behind the ravaged reality of his injuries. He crawled out of the hole and slumped against the kitchen cabinets, his skin pale and beaded with sweat. He was still stark naked, a fact that Daphne was trying very hard to ignore, though it was like trying to ignore a wildfire in her living room. You need clothes, Daphne said, her voice sounding thin in her own ears, and you need to get off my floor. Food, Kieran grunted, his eyes squeezed shut, and water. Daphne ran to her bedroom and dug through the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. She pulled out a pair of grey sweatpants and a thick flannel shirt that had belonged to her father. They were big. Her dad had been a large man, but Kieran was something else entirely. She returned to the kitchen and tossed the bundle at him. Put these on. I'll make a steak. While Kieran struggled into the clothes, wincing as the fabric brushed his stitched wounds, Daphne threw 2 ribeyes into a cast-iron skillet. She didn't cook them. She barely seared them. Instinct told her this man, this creature, didn't want medium rare. He wanted blood. She set the plate on the small wooden table. Kieran practically fell into the chair. He didn't use a fork. He tore into the meat with a savagery that made Daphne take a step back. It wasn't human. It was pure predatory efficiency. In less than 2 minutes, 2 pounds of steak were gone. He drank a quart of water in one long draught, then finally looked at her. The colour was returning to his face, the grey pallor replaced by a flush of heat. "You lied," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with that gravel-grinding voice. "I did." Daphne crossed her arms, leaning against the counter to keep her distance. "Those men, they had dead eyes. I didn't like them. And I don't like people hunting on my land." Kieran studied her. His amber eyes tracked her every movement, unnerving and intense. "You have no idea what you have done, Daphne Rain. You think you saved a stray dog? You stepped into the middle of a coup." "You said your name is Kieran," she said. "Who are you really? And don't tell me you're a werewolf. I'm a scientist. I deal in biology, not fairy tales." Kieran let out a dark, humourless laugh. He stood up. The flannel shirt was tight across his shoulders, the buttons straining. He walked toward her. Daphne held her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to run. He stopped inches from her. He smelled of pine, rain, and raw power. He reached out, taking her hand. He placed it on his chest, right over his heart. It was beating slow. Thump, thump, thump. But it was hitting her palm with the force of a sledgehammer. "Biology," Kieran whispered. "Then explain this." As Daphne watched, the jagged cut on his jawline, a graze from a bullet, began to knit together. The skin rippled, steam rising faintly from the paw, and within 10 seconds, the wound was gone. Only a faint white line remained. Daphne snatched her hand back, gasping. "Hypermetabolism, cellular regeneration." "I am the Alpha," Kieran said, the word vibrating in the air. "I am the king of the Silver River Pack, the ruling pack of the Northwest Territories, and the men who shot me were my own guard." Daphne's mind reeled. She turned away, pacing the small kitchen. Okay, so you're a king, a wolf king, and you're currently hiding in the kitchen of a struggling vet tech in the middle of a blizzard while a hit squad patrols my driveway." "Correct," Kieran said calmly. He moved to the window, peering out through the crack in the curtains. "The storm is worsening. That is good. The snow will mask my scent. But the silver is still in my blood. It weakens me. I cannot shift, and I cannot fight at full strength." "So what happens now?" Daphne asked. Kieran turned to her. The look in his eyes changed. It wasn't just assessment anymore. It was possession. "Now we survive. You saved my life, Daphne. By the ancient laws of my people, that creates a bond. A debt." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low rumble that Daphne felt in her stomach. "Until I am strong enough to kill the traitors who hunt me, I am your prisoner. And you are my keeper." The lights in the cabin flickered and died. Daphne looked up at the ceiling fan as it slowed to a halt. The hum of the refrigerator cut out. The silence of the mountain winter rushed in, absolute and terrifying. "The power lines," Daphne said, panic rising in her throat. "The storm must have knocked a tree onto them." "No," Kieran said, his body tense, his head cocked as if listening to a sound Daphne couldn't hear. "The wind didn't do that. They cut the power." He moved instantly, grabbing Daphne by the waist and pulling her away from the window and into the hallway, out of the line of sight. His grip was iron hard. "They are testing the perimeter," Kieran hissed into her ear. "They don't know I'm here for sure, but they suspect. They want to flush us out. We have to call the police." Daphne fumbled for her phone in her pocket. Kieran's hand clamped over hers. "No police. The local sheriff is on my cousin's payroll. That's how they found me on the pass. If you call for help, you are calling the executioner." Daphne looked at her phone. No signal anyway. "We are alone," Kieran said, "and night is coming." The temperature in the cabin began to drop immediately. Without the electric blowers, the wood stove was the only source of heat, and its reach was limited to the living room. Kieran moved furniture with effortless strength, barricading the back door and the kitchen windows. He moved with a military precision that terrified Daphne. This wasn't just a beast, this was a soldier. "We stay in the main room," Kieran commanded. "One point of entry. Easier to defend." Daphne huddled on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket. She watched him check the load in a hunting rifle she kept in the closet, a .3006 she hadn't fired in years. He handled the weapon with familiar ease, checking the sights, counting the rounds. "Who is doing this?" Daphne asked, her voice trembling. "Who wants you dead?" Kieran sat on the floor by the fire, the rifle across his knees. The firelight danced on his sharp cheekbones. "His name is Victor. He was my beta. My second." "Why?" "Power," Kieran spat the word like a curse. "I have attempted to modernize our laws. I banned the hunting of humans in our territory. I enforced treaties with the local ranchers. Victor believes in the old ways. He believes we should rule over your kind, not live beside you. He thinks I am weak because I show mercy." He looked at Daphne. "He shot me in the back during a council meeting. I took 4 bullets and jumped through a window into the river. I washed up miles downstream, shifted, and tried to run. That's when you found me." Daphne looked at the stitches on his shoulder. "Mercy isn't weakness," she said softly. Kieran's eyes locked onto hers. For a moment, the hardness in his face fractured. "In my world, Daphne, mercy is usually a death sentence. But you showed me mercy, and you are not weak." He crawled toward her on the floor, moving like a wolf even in human form. He stopped at her feet. He rested his head against her knee. It was a shocking gesture of intimacy. "You are freezing," he noted. "The fire isn't enough," she admitted, her teeth chattering. "Body heat," Kieran said. "It is the only way." He pulled her down from the sofa onto the pile of blankets and pillows he had arranged before the hearth. Daphne stiffened, but Kieran didn't make a move on her. He simply curled his massive body around hers, his back to the door, shielding her. He was a furnace. The heat radiating from him was unnatural, burning through the layers of clothes. Daphne lay there, her back pressed against the chest of a werewolf king, listening to the slow, powerful rhythm of his heart. "Why me?" she whispered into the darkness. "Why did you end up on my road?" "Fate," Kieran murmured, his voice heavy with sleep and healing. "Or luck. But I smell something on you, Daphne." "What?" "Loneliness," he said. "It smells like rain on dry earth. You have been alone a long time." Daphne felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't answer. She just let the warmth seep into her bones. Hours passed. The wind howled outside, sounding like screaming voices. Suddenly Kieran went rigid. He sat up, hand clamping over Daphne's mouth before she could make a sound. His eyes were glowing, literally glowing. A bright, electric amber in the dark room. Crunch. Someone was on the porch. Kieran leaned close to her ear, his breath hot. "Stay here. Do not move. Do not scream." He stood up silently. He didn't take the gun. He flexed his hands, and Daphne watched in horror and fascination as his fingernails lengthened, turning into black, curved talons. His jaw popped, his canines extending over his lip. He was shifting, but only partially. A hybrid form designed for violence in tight spaces. The front door handle turned. It was locked. Then a heavy boot kicked the wood right near the deadbolt. The door splintered. Another kick. The door flew open, letting in a swirl of snow and wind. 2 shapes loomed in the doorway. They held assault rifles equipped with silencers. Kieran didn't wait. He launched himself from the shadows. It was a blur of violence. Kieran hit the first man with the force of a freight train, driving him back out onto the porch. The second man fired. Thwip, thwip. But Kieran was too fast. He ducked under the spray of bullets, his claws slashing across the man's thigh. The mercenary screamed. Kieran grabbed him by the tactical vest and threw him off the porch into the snow as if he were a rag doll. Daphne scrambled backward, pressing herself against the stone fireplace. Kieran stood on the porch, shirtless, roaring into the storm. It was a sound that vibrated the windows, a challenge, a declaration of war. "Is that all you have, Victor?" Kieran bellowed into the night. "Send better dogs!" A single shot rang out from the tree line. High caliber, sniper. Kieran jerked back, clutching his chest. "No!" Daphne screamed. She ran to the door. Kieran stumbled backward into the cabin, slamming the broken door shut and shoving a heavy oak table against it. He slid down the wall, blood dark and fast, flowing from a new wound just below his collarbone. "Sniper," he gasped, pink froth on his lips. "They brought a sniper." Daphne fell to her knees beside him, her hands pressing frantically against the wound. "You're healing, right? You can heal this?" Kieran grabbed her wrist. His grip was weaker this time. "It's wolfsbane. The bullet coated in it." His eyes were losing their glow. The amber was fading to a dull brown. "Daphne," he rasped, "I cannot fight them like this. I need the boost." "What boost? Tell me what to do." Tears were streaming down her face now. She didn't understand why she was crying for a monster she met yesterday, but the thought of him dying tore at her chest. "The bond," Kieran whispered. "An alpha draws strength from his mate, or from a willing soul." He looked at her neck, the pulse jumping in her jugular. "You have to let me mark you," Kieran said. "It will bind your life force to mine for a moment. It will give me the power to shift fully. But it will hurt, and it will make you a target forever." "Do it," Daphne said without hesitation. The door behind them shuddered under a new assault. They were out of time. "Are you sure?" Kieran's eyes searched hers. "Once I bite you, there is no going back. You belong to the pack. You belong to me." "I am not letting you die on my floor, Kieran Hale," she said fiercely. "Do it!" Kieran groaned, a sound of agony and desire. He pulled her close, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He paused for a fraction of a second, inhaling her scent, lavender and fear. Then his teeth sank into the soft flesh where her shoulder met her neck. Daphne screamed, a sharp, white-hot pain shooting through her body. But following the pain was a rush of electricity, a golden fire that seemed to pour from her veins into his. She felt a connection snap into place, like a steel cable anchoring her to him. She could feel his pain, his rage, and his overwhelming, desperate need to protect her. Kieran pulled back. His mouth was stained with her blood, but his eyes were burning like twin suns. The wound on his chest hissed, black smoke rising from it as the wolfsbane was purged from his system by the surge of power. The bullet pushed itself out of his skin, clattering to the floor. He stood up. He seemed taller now, broader. The shadows in the room seemed to bend toward him. "Stay behind me, Daphne," Kieran commanded. His voice wasn't gravel anymore. It was thunder. He turned toward the door as the wood shattered completely. 3 men rushed in. Kieran didn't just fight them. He dismantled them. He moved faster than the eye could follow, a whirlwind of claws and tactical precision. He wasn't just a wolf. He was a king reclaiming his throne. In seconds, the room was clear. The mercenaries were either unconscious or thrown out into the snow. Kieran stood in the open doorway, panting. He looked back at Daphne. She was clutching her bleeding neck, staring at him wide-eyed. He walked back to her, gentle now. He licked the wound on her neck, sealing it with his saliva, soothing the pain instantly. "The pack is coming," he said softly, stroking her cheek with a blood-stained hand. "My loyal guards heard the roar. Victor has lost this round." He leaned his forehead against hers. "You gave me your blood, Daphne Rain. You gave me your strength." He pulled back, his expression serious, terrifyingly solemn. "You are no longer just a vet tech. You are the Alpha's chosen, and heaven help anyone who tries to touch you now." The silence that followed the violence was louder than the gunshots. Daphne stood in the center of her ruined living room, her chest heaving, her hand still clutching the drying blood on her neck. The mark Kieran had left there throbbed with a dull, heavy heat, like a second heart beating against her skin. Kieran was pacing. The feral energy of the fight hadn't left him. He was prowling around the bodies of the mercenaries, checking for pulses, his face a mask of cold, imperious rage. He didn't look like the injured stray she'd saved anymore. He looked like a warlord. "They are all unconscious," Kieran announced, kicking a rifle across the floor. "But they won't be for long. We need to move." "My house," Daphne whispered, looking at the shattered door, the bullet holes in her grandmother's quilt, the blood soaked into the floorboards. "Look at my house." Kieran stopped. He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing her shoulders. His touch was firm, grounding. "Daphne, look at me. This place is compromised. Victor knows where you live. If we stay here, a second wave will come, and they will simply burn it down with us inside." "I can't just leave," she argued, panic rising. "My job, my cat, my father's things." "Barnaby is in the root cellar," Kieran said, remembering the cat's name surprisingly well. "Get him. Get a bag. You have 3 minutes." Before Daphne could argue, a rhythmic thumping sound began to vibrate the remaining window panes. It grew louder, a deep whoop 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 that shook the snow from the roof. Daphne ran to the window. Blinding spotlights cut through the darkness from above. A helicopter, a sleek, black, military-grade machine, was descending into her pasture, kicking up a tornado of snow. Is that yours?" Daphne asked, her jaw dropping. "My extraction team," Kieran said, pulling a shirt from the pile of laundry she'd done earlier. He put it on, wincing slightly, though his movements were fluid. The horrific chest wound was already a pink scar. "Go, now!" Daphne scrambled. She grabbed her veterinary bag, shoved some clothes into a backpack, and scooped up Barnaby, who was hissing in the cellar. When she returned to the living room, the front door was blocked by 3 new figures. But these weren't mercenaries. They were giants, dressed in expensive dark winter gear. The leader, a man with a shaved head and tattoos creeping up his neck, bowed his head to Kieran. "Alpha," the man rumbled. "We secured the perimeter. 2 snipers neutralized in the tree line." "Took you long enough, Garrick," Kieran growled. "The storm scrambled the comms," Garrick replied. His eyes slid to Daphne. They narrowed instantly. He sniffed the air, his nose wrinkling in distaste. "You have a civilian." Then his eyes locked on the bloody bite mark on her neck. Garrick went rigid. The woman standing next to him, a tall, striking blonde with eyes like ice, audibly gasped. "Kieran," the woman said, her voice sharp, "tell me you didn't." "I did what was necessary, Sloane," Kieran said, his voice dropping an octave, warning them to back off. "She saved my life. She gave me the strength to hold the line until you arrived." Sloane stepped forward, her hostility radiating like heat. "You marked a human. A pet? Do you have any idea what the Council will do? You've just handed Victor a loaded gun." "She is not a pet," Kieran snapped, stepping between Daphne and Sloane. "She is the savior of your king. Show respect, or I will tear your throat out right here in this snow." The threat hung heavy in the air. Sloane lowered her eyes, baring her neck in submission, but the hatred in her gaze when she looked at Daphne was undimmed. "We leave," Kieran commanded. "Torch the cabin." Daphne screamed. "What? No, you can't!" Kieran turned to her, his expression pained but resolute. "Daphne, listen to me. Victor leaves no loose ends. He will send forensics teams. He will find your hair, your DNA, your scent. He will use this place to track your family, your friends. It has to be erased." "I have nowhere else to go," she cried, clutching the cat carrier. "You have somewhere," Kieran said, grabbing her hand. "You are coming with me." Garrick threw a flare onto the floor. The rug, soaked in kerosene from a lamp that had broken during the fight, caught instantly. Daphne watched in horror as the flames licked up the curtains. Kieran didn't give her time to mourn. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her and the cat out into the blizzard towards the waiting helicopter. As they lifted off, Daphne looked down. Her home, the only legacy her father had left her, was a small orange square burning in the vast, indifferent darkness of the mountains. She looked at Kieran, sitting opposite her in the leather interior of the chopper. He was busy barking orders into a headset, transforming from the rugged survivor into a CEO of violence. He looked up and caught her eye. He reached out, covering her trembling hand with his. "I will replace it," he said, his voice fighting the roar of the rotors. "I will give you a palace for that cabin, Daphne. I swear it." Daphne pulled her hand away, staring out at the black void. "I don't want a palace, Kieran. I just want my life back." "That life is gone," Kieran said, his face hardening. "The moment you stopped your truck, that life ended. Now, you are in mine." The flight took 2 hours. Daphne slept fitfully, waking up only when the pitch of the rotors changed. She looked out the window and gasped. They weren't landing in a forest, they were landing on a skyscraper. Below them lay the glittering sprawl of Seattle, but they were descending toward a massive, ultra-modern structure built into the cliffs overlooking the Sound, separated from the city by miles of private forest. It was a fortress of glass, steel, and black stone, the Silver River Estate. "I thought wolves lived in the woods," Daphne muttered. "We do," Kieran said, unbuckling his harness, "but we rule from the sky. My pack controls the shipping lanes, the tech sector, and the real estate of the Pacific Northwest. Did you think we paid for our steaks with deer hides?" The helicopter touched down on a private helipad. An army of staff was waiting. Daphne felt woefully underdressed in her blood-stained hoodie and jeans. She clutched Barnaby's carrier like a shield. They were ushered into an elevator that descended rapidly. When the doors opened, Daphne found herself in a sprawling penthouse that looked like a spread in Architectural Digest, if the magazine had a Bond villain edition. "Take her to the East Wing," Kieran instructed a maid who had appeared from nowhere. "Get her clean. Get her clothes. Get the cat whatever it eats." "Wait," Daphne said, stepping forward. "Where are you going?" Kieran paused, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt, which had magically been provided to him by an aide the moment he stepped off the chopper. "I have a council to convene. I have been missing for 3 days. My enemies think I am dead. I need to correct that assumption, loudly. And what am I supposed to do?" Kieran walked back to her. He loomed over her, his presence suffocatingly intense. He reached out and touched the bite mark on her neck again. A jolt of pleasure pain zipped down her spine. "You stay here. You do not leave this floor. The windows are bulletproof. The guards at the elevator are lethal. You are the safest woman on the planet right now." "I'm a prisoner," she spat. "You are a guest," Kieran corrected smoothly. "A very controversial guest." He turned and left. Daphne watched him go, feeling a mixture of relief and terrifying abandonment. 2 hours later, Daphne was scrubbed clean, smelling of expensive sandalwood soap. She was wearing a silk dress the maid had provided. It was emerald green and fit her curves a little too perfectly. It made her feel like a doll. She paced the length of the living room. The view was spectacular, looking out over the dark water. But she felt trapped. She needed answers. She walked to the massive double doors. 2 guards stood there. "I want to see Kieran," she demanded. "The Alpha is in session," the guard said, staring straight ahead. "He is not to be disturbed." "I don't care," Daphne said. "I'm not part of your pack. I want to leave." The guard looked at her then. His eyes flashed yellow. "You bear the mark, Miss Rain. That makes you pack property. Go sit down." Pack property. The words ignited a fuse in Daphne's temper. She was a Rain. Her father had fought wildfires. Her grandfather had survived bear attacks. She didn't do property. She turned and marched back into the room. She spotted a service elevator in the pantry area. It was keyed with a keypad. Daphne looked at the keypad. She thought back to the helicopter ride. Kieran had punched a code into his phone to unlock it. 1031. Halloween? No, the date of the blood moon. She'd heard him mention it to Garrick. She tried the code. Beep, the doors slid open. Daphne grabbed Barnaby, whom she had let out, but now shoved back into his carrier amidst protests, and slipped inside. The elevator took her down, past the residential floors, deep into the heart of the building. The doors opened onto a balcony overlooking a massive, circular amphitheater. It was dimly lit, carved from black stone. Below, 100 people were gathered. They stood in a circle. In the center stood Kieran. He was stripped to the waist again, his scars on display. He looked magnificent and terrifying. Facing him was an older man with silver hair and a cruel, aristocratic face. He was flanked by 10 armed guards. Daphne crouched behind the railing, listening. "You abandoned your post, Kieran," the older man sneered. His voice echoed in the stone chamber. "You vanished. You left the pack vulnerable to Victor's raids." "I was recovering from the bullets your son put in my back, Councilman Thorne." Kieran's voice was calm, but deadly. "Lies," Thorne spat. "Victor is a patriot. You are a weakling who plays with human treaties. And now, rumors say you have broken the highest law." Thorne took a step closer to Kieran. "Show us your neck, Alpha. Show us the bond." Kieran didn't move. "They say you marked a human," Thorne yelled, turning to the crowd. A murmur of disgust rippled through the room. "They say you diluted the royal bloodline with common mud." "I did what I had to do to survive," Kieran said. "Survival at the cost of purity is treason," Thorne roared. "If you have marked a human, she must be presented. She must be tested." "She is under my protection," Kieran growled, a low rumbling sound that made the balcony vibrate under Daphne's hands. "The law is clear," Thorne shouted. "If an alpha mates with a human, the human must run the gauntlet. If she is strong enough to serve the moon, she lives. If she dies, then the alpha is free of his mistake." Daphne's blood ran cold. "The gauntlet. I will not subject her to that," Kieran said. "She saved me. I will not repay her with torture." "Then you forfeit your title." Thorne drew a sword from his cane. "If you refuse the law, you are no king of mine." The room erupted in shouting. Men were shifting, fur bursting through suits, claws extending. It was a powder keg about to blow. Kieran was outnumbered. Thorne had half the council behind him. Daphne realized the truth then. Kieran was protecting her, yes, but his protection was costing him his crown. He was about to fight his own people, 50 against 1, to keep her from this gauntlet. He would die. He was still healing. He couldn't take them all. Daphne stood up. She didn't think. She just acted. "Stop!" Her voice rang out from the balcony, clear and loud. Every head in the room snapped up. 100 pairs of glowing eyes locked onto her. Daphne walked to the railing. Her green dress caught the light. She held her head high, despite her knees shaking so hard she thought she might collapse. "I am Daphne Rain," she announced, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength. "I am the one he marked." Kieran looked up, his face a mask of horror. "Daphne, get back!" She ignored him. She looked directly at Thorne. "You want to test me?" she called down. "You think I'm weak because I'm human? I dragged your king out of a snowbank. I stitched him up while his enemies were banging on my door. I faced down a hit squad with a kitchen knife." She gripped the railing. "I don't know what your gauntlet is, but if you want to challenge my right to stand beside him, then bring it on." Silence descended on the hall. Absolute, stunned silence. Thorne looked up at her, a slow, malicious smile spreading across his face. "Very well," Thorne said softly. "The human chooses the trial." He looked at Kieran, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Prepare the arena, Alpha. Tonight your pet runs with the wolves. Let us see if she survives the hunt." Kieran looked at Daphne. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked terrified. He mouthed one word to her from the pit below. Run. The gauntlet was not an arena. It was the obsidian woods, 500 acres of dense, treacherous forest bordering the estate. The rules were simple. Daphne had to survive until sunrise. Hunting her were 3 of Thorn's most vicious enforcers in their wolf forms. She had no weapons, just the silk dress she had ripped at the thigh for mobility and her knowledge of anatomy. The air was freezing. Daphne crouched in the hollow of a massive redwood tree, her breath misting. She could hear them, the snapping of twigs, the heavy panting of beasts closing in. They weren't trying to be stealthy. They wanted her to know she was going to die. A low growl vibrated right behind her. Daphne spun around. A grey wolf, massive and scarred, stood 10 feet away. It was Thorn's lieutenant. He didn't lunge immediately. He circled, savouring the fear. Daphne's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. But beneath the fear, something else was rising. The mark on her neck burned hot, sending waves of liquid fire into her bloodstream. It wasn't just Kieran's strength. It was his anger, his authority. The wolf sprang. Daphne didn't run. She couldn't outrun a wolf. Instead, she dropped to her knees, sliding on the pine needles, dodging the snapping jaws by an inch. As the beast sailed over her, she grabbed a heavy, jagged rock she had hidden in her palm. She didn't aim for the head. She aimed for the hock, the vulnerable tendon in the hind leg. Crunch! The wolf yelped, crashing into the dirt, its leg useless. But it scrambled up on 3 legs, eyes glowing with murderous rage. It lunged again, jaws clamping onto her forearm. Pain exploded in her arm, white and blinding. "Kieran!" she screamed, not in desperation, but in fury. The connection snapped open. She felt the Alpha's presence flood her mind, and with it, the voice, the command. Daphne looked into the wolf's eyes. Her own eyes weren't brown anymore. For a split second, they flashed a brilliant, blinding amber. "Submit!" The word didn't sound like her. It sounded like a landslide. It echoed through the trees, a sonic boom of pure dominance. The grey wolf froze mid-air. Its whimper was pathetic as the ancient magic forced it to the ground, belly up, throat bared in surrender. It wasn't a choice. It was biology. She carried the Alpha's blood, and the pack had to obey. Silence fell over the woods. Then the trees parted. Kieran stepped out. He was fully shifted, a towering midnight black beast. He looked at the whimpering wolf on the ground, then at Daphne, bleeding but standing tall. Kieran shifted back to human form, ignoring his nudity in the freezing cold. He walked to Daphne, his eyes wide with awe. "You used the voice," he whispered, grabbing her uninjured hand. That is impossible for a human." "I told you," Daphne panted, the adrenaline crashing, leaving her trembling. "I'm not a pet." "No." Lights flooded the woods. The council had arrived to witness the kill. Instead, they found their assassin groveling at the feet of a vet tech. Kieran turned to Thorn, who stood at the edge of the clearing, his face pale. "She has survived," Kieran roared, his voice carrying to the terrified onlookers. "She has commanded. By the laws of the first moon, she is pack." He pulled Daphne against his side, his arm a steel band around her waist. "Thorn, you challenged my mate. You lost." Kieran moved faster than thought. In one fluid motion, he crossed the distance to Thorn. There was no trial, no speech, just a brutal, decisive strike. Thorn fell, and the rebellion died with him. Kieran looked at the remaining council members. "Bow," he commanded. One by one, they dropped to their knees in the snow, not just to the king, but to the woman with the human heart and the Alpha's roar. Kieran turned to Daphne, lifting her chin. He kissed the blood off her lip. "I promised you a palace," he murmured against her mouth, "but I think you just conquered a kingdom." Daphne looked at the wolves bowing in the snow. She looked at the man who would burn the world for her. "I don't want a kingdom, Kieran," she whispered. "I just want to go home." "You are home," he said. Deep in the shadows of the forest, unseen by anyone, A camera shutter clicked. A figure watched from the ridge, dialing a phone. "Victor?" the spy whispered. "It's worse than we thought. She's not just his mate, she's an alpha." The war wasn't over. It had just begun. What a twist. Daphne didn't just survive the gauntlet. She completely rewrote the rules of the werewolf world. But that ending, who was watching them from the ridge? And what does it mean that a human can use the alpha voice? It seems Kieran and Daphne have won the battle, but the war for the throne is far from over. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells me you want to see part 2 of the Alpha's debt saga. Do you think Daphne will transform into a wolf or stay human with alpha powers? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you don't miss the next episode. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.